And she's the special rapporteur. She should be fired. When you say there, and I've gone over her other statements that have been made for quite a long time, and there were many others like her, particularly in the Human Rights Council realm, who are just totally, unambiguously anti-Semitic.
Well, I mean, the statements as you've described, I mean, certainly are unacceptable from the U.S. perspective. If I could go back to UNRWA, Congressman, look, this has been a years-long effort, and it's something that we continue to apply ourselves to clear out, to bring to the attention of UNRWA, to clear out anti-Semitic or any other sort of incitement language in education materials. But I would also underline that right now, especially at this moment of crisis, UNRWA is the backbone of the strong UN-coordinated humanitarian response to the crisis in Gaza, and in any post-conflict setting, it will serve that purpose.
Again, I'm out of time, but the textbooks and all the rest is all done by the PA. It's not done by the UN or us.
Yep.
We're the major contributor.
Yep. Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes Mr. Sherman.
The gentleman from New Jersey is correct as to the special rapporteur, and we have sent a letter, and perhaps we should send another one urging for her dismissal. From the river to the sea, people should know what that means. It means kill or expel every Jew between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. A second Holocaust. Now, we had a ceasefire on October 6th. Hamas's forces exploded out and killed 1,400 people, took 240 roughly hostages. Now, their fighters could have stayed in Israel and fought. Instead, they quickly retreated behind their human shields. Now, we hear those calling for a ceasefire. Hamas has declared that they want a ceasefire, and has declared what they would do with a ceasefire. They would regroup, and these are the words of just a few days ago of a senior member of their Politburo, and then they would do another October 7th, and another after that, and 2 and 3 and 4 times until Israel is destroyed. So those who delight in the 1,400 Israeli deaths and the butchered babies and the raped women, of course, join that call for a regroup ceasefire and a chance to do October 7 2, 3, 4, 5 times. Now, in any war, a country has got to weigh achieving its military objectives, avoiding casualties of its own forces, and minimizing civilian casualties on the other side. Israel has gone beyond the United States and any other country in every way to sacrifice its own soldiers, to sacrifice or delay its military objectives in order to avoid civilian casualties. When in our bombing of North Vietnam or Germany or Japan did we ever warn civilians or anyone else and give up the possible surprise? When did we provide food shipments to Nazi Germany or Japan or North Vietnam? In fact, it was a British and American blockade of Germany and Austro-Hungary that pretty much led to their defeat, a food blockade. When did we ever provide fuel shipments to Japan or Germany or North Vietnam? In fact, we bombed and destroyed every fuel facility we could. Yet Israel warns. Israel facilitates food, and America, its ally, pays for that food. And Israel is allowing fuel in spite of the fact that Hamas stockpiles it. I have the obscure honor of being the only CPA on this committee, and so I've focused a little bit on casualty statistics. Even if you accept Hamas casualty statistics as being honest, if a Hamas fighter who happens to be 17 gets blown up by his own rocket while trying to kill Israeli civilians with it, they count that as a child casualty for which Israel should be held responsible. If a rocket falls, as 1/3 of them do, onto Gaza and explodes, as it did at that famous hospital, they try to hold Israel responsible. And if Israel kills a Hamas commander, that death is included along the deaths that we are now told are the civilian casualties. Ms. Assistant Secretary, we hear calls for a ceasefire. Is there any proof that if a ceasefire were declared today, that all the hostages would be released tomorrow or immediately?
No, Congressman, there's not. There's no guarantee.
Now, Israeli officials are doing a lot to minimize civilian casualties. They provide the warnings. We've seen several humanitarian pauses, basically a permanent pause around the Rafah gate. Can you describe in other ways how IDF has reduced civilian casualties? Or perhaps the Deputy Assistant Secretary.
Let me start by adding even more details to your outline of what Israel does to prioritize protection of civilians. They have dropped 1.5 million leaflets in Gaza asking civilians to evacuate. They have sent over hundreds of thousands of text messages and made phone calls to cell phones warning of their
If I can interrupt, did we ever provide leaflets over Hanoi? To my knowledge, no. I'm
to my
older.
knowledge,
I remember.
sir.
Go ahead.
We know that Israel, in our conversations with the Israel Defense Forces, they have made very clear that they assess collateral damage estimates before they take strikes. They have legal reviews through their chain of command, and when there are incidents of civilian harm, they investigate them after.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields, or I now recognize Ms. Wagner.
I thank the chairman, and I thank our witnesses for their service. The United States, Israel, and our many partners in the Middle East share a common enemy, Iran. Iran and the terrorist puppets that do its bidding. We cannot waver in our support for Israel and our opposition to Iran, Hamas, and other terrorist proxies. It is the only path to peace in the Middle East. Assistant Secretary Leif, does Iran have the military capacity and intent to escalate this war, including by supporting Hezbollah or the Houthis in the opening and in opening additional fronts, I'll say? And how is the U.S. communicating that escalation would be unacceptably costly for Iran and its terrorist proxies?
Thank you, Congresswoman. Yes, I would say Iran certainly has the capabilities in the sense of the architecture of proxies that you've just described, from Hamas, to Hezbollah, to the myriad Iraqi militias, the Houthi. It certainly has the capacity to escalate. I would say over the course of 4 weeks, we have been in a very steady, relentless state of messaging, of course, use of our force posture adjustments, increases, messaging directly and through other parties on a constant, relentless basis. And I think while there has been escalatory at times, sort of tit for tat, but escalatory on the part of Hezbollah, tit for tat at the northern border of Israel, we have seen success so far in keeping that escalation capped.
Deputy Assistant Secretary Stroll, last week a Wall Street Journal article reported that the Wagner Group, Russia's paramilitary arm, plans to provide an air defense system to Hezbollah, specifically the Russian SA-22, with concerns that Hezbollah may open up a northern front against Israel, knowing the capacity that they have and the number of rockets that they have. What are the ramifications to Israel's security if Russia increases the transfer of weapon systems to Hezbollah? And what is the likelihood that Russia will provide offensive weapon systems to Hezbollah and other proxies of Iran like Hamas?
Thank you for that question. I think Russia and Putin would like nothing more than for the United States to be bogged down in the Middle East with a view that that would shift our strategic focus from also ensuring that Russian aggression cannot be victorious in Ukraine in that war against civilians and civilian infrastructure. Secondly, we have been warning for some time now about the implications for regional security and stability of deepening Russian-Iranian military cooperation across the board, and that would certainly include whatever Russia might be contemplating providing to
I
Hezbollah.
don't know if we need to move to a classified setting at some point in time, but discussing Russia's potential a movement of an air defense system to Hezbollah equal to the SA-22, I consider that a huge escalation, and I'd like to perhaps in another setting have more information on it.
It would be a huge escalation. It would be hugely jeopardizing to Israel's security, especially when we have worked so hard to prevent the opening of a second front, and would be more than happy to provide you additional information in a closed session.
I appreciate that. Assistant Secretary Leaf, I am gravely concerned that Iran and Iranian proxies are using the Israel-Hamas war to undermine the Abraham Accords. How is the State Department communicating to the region that peace with Israel serves the interests of Arab states who face serious threats from Iran and terrorist proxies? How is this message being received in the region? Thank you.
So, I mean, the good news is those countries that have established relations with Israel have an ongoing commitment to those relationships. Obviously, they're strained at this point. The channels of communication are strained. These partners are very focused on, and their publics are very focused on, and enraged, frankly, by the mounting toll of casualties among civilians, Palestinian civilians in Gaza. But that said, I've heard nothing that would sway me from the belief that there is a day on the other side of this conflict where people will work to repair those relations, because there's a common good to that.
Well, and I hope that we're pushing back against the misinformation and propaganda that's being disseminated by Iran and its proxies, especially in these Abraham Accord countries. So I would encourage that. And my time has expired, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. Chair recognizes Mr. Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up on the fact that just in the preceding days, just before October 7th, the talks were extended between, with the U.S. involvement, Israel and Saudi Arabia for normalization with Israel. How would you categorize, first, the status of those negotiations at that juncture? How would you categorize them after this, and how would you categorize them in the future? I think it's important for the United States to be clear with our resolve to continue these talks, and I think it would be in everyone's interest for Saudi Arabia and the other countries to do the same, so that any thought that the success and progress of these thoughts was benefited from this heinous attack can be dispelled immediately.
Thank you, Congressman. I was very much involved in those discussions just prior to, in the months leading up to October 7th. Obviously, they're on pause at this point, given the crisis in the region. But I think it's fair to say that Saudi leadership saw strategic benefit in pursuing this. They asked the U.S. to be the midwife to this set of agreements. We were deep into discussions on a number of fronts. Ironically, we were just on the cusp of beginning the discussions about what we call the Palestinian component to that normalization agreement. And it's something that I would expect to be able to resume on the other side of this crisis. And because there is a larger good here for all of the parties. But I will say, very candidly, this conflict, this crisis has roiled up just a huge amount of public anger towards Israel, towards us. This is something we're going to have to work through. We're all, I would say, collectively anxious to see this conflict over sooner rather than later, and certainly the human suffering, the human toll that it is taking end. But there is a set of principles that underlie our engagements, and one of them, the engagements now and the engagements post-conflict, and that is very squarely focused on Palestinian statehood, and alongside that, a wider regional effort at normalization.
In your opening statement, you made reference to the fact that one of your primary objectives is to protect U.S. troops in the region. Now, I think the United States has shown enormous restraint given the attacks that have been public on U.S. servicemen in that region, men and women that are risking their lives, as well as the people serving in our embassies in those areas. Could you give us the status of what the current threat is to our embassies, what it is to our service people, our service members on the ground, as well as what steps we've taken to upgrade our security of both our military and civilian people on the ground in this region?
So, Congressman, we'll split the question if you'll allow us. In terms of our diplomatic missions, so look, since the beginning hours of this crisis, we anticipated that there could be public churns and there could be certainly an escalation of terrorist attacks, both from known groups as well as lone wolf attacks. So we've been in a steady state with all of our mission leadership of calibrating, looking every day at the security situation and calibrating decisions about whether to, for instance, send home non-essential personnel or allow family members to depart in some cases. So we've done the necessary where we thought it was useful for embassy staffing, where, and if, for instance, in Iraq in our mission, Consulate Erbil is still open, Embassy Baghdad is still open, but we have reduced non-essential personnel given the volatility of the situation and the possibilities of conflict.
Thank you, Congressman. Cognizant that time is short, I'll be very succinct. There have been over 41 attacks on U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria. U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria are there only for the Defeat ISIS mission in support of local partners for no other purpose. Since October 17th, we have flowed additional air defense assets in to protect against the increasing pace and severity of the attacks by Iran and Iran-backed groups against our forces. We have also demonstrated, as President Biden has said, he has no higher priority than the protection of U.S. forces, that we are prepared to use military force, demonstrated that we will use force in self-defense as we did.
If I could, I've got 5 seconds left. I just want to emphasize the fact that this is 13 days ago, as we sit here, Hamas was in Moscow in talks that I think we'll deal with in classified session. But as our service people, as our embassies are threatened, it's important to remember Iran and Russia and their role in this as well. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes Mr. Mast.
Thank you, Chairman. Do either of you monitor the Gaza Health Ministry?
I do not.
No.
No. So I think it's, decent to look at. It's what the lady that got pulled out was parroting when she said 10,000 civilians were killed. And it's not just what they were parroting in back there. It's literally what UNRWA parrots. And then when UNRWA parrots it, it's what Al Jazeera and New York Times and BBC and everybody else, it's what everybody else starts parroting. And I'm going to read you directly from them what they want everybody to parrot. So accordingly to the Gaza Health Ministry, 9,770 people have been killed. This is in Gaza. 70% were women, children, older persons. 24,158 people injured. 2,260 reported missing. At one point, 521 families, 3,109 citizens, and they give very specific information. Do you notice anything glaringly missing from what I just mentioned to you from the Gaza Health Ministry report? Is there anything that strikes you as glaringly missing?
I'm sorry, I don't know what you're referring to.
Combatants. They didn't mention the word combatants
No,
at all.
because they mingle them.
Exactly. That's exactly the point. They expect the world to believe that all these people and these groups that they're dividing up to families and older persons and children, which they consider anybody under 18, and women, that none of them are combatants. That's what they want the world to believe, and that's what the United Nations goes out there and parrots, and that's what the media goes out there and parrots. So I want to get to a few of those points because it leads to a circle that's going on, and the circle is this. This shouldn't be provocative to anybody. Hamas lies. Hamas and Palestinians lie. It's their government. I've had a number of my colleagues that have agreed with me on Twitter that it's their government, even though they tried to censure me on this. But, and then they say they lie, but then they pretend everybody is a victim. And then after they say everybody's a victim, there's anti-Semitic riots and terrorism. And then after that happens, then there's people, members and others, that call for ceasefires in another country and things like this. So I want to ask a few questions on that. Are all combatants men? in this war?
We're not on the ground and would not be in a
Do you think
position
they're all?
to confirm.
Do you think they're all men? You're in DOD. You monitored Iraq and Afghanistan. Are all combatants men?
Generally speaking, all combatants are not men.
Thank you. Are they all over the age of 18?
Broadly speaking, there are plenty of designated foreign terrorist organizations who use children in combat.
Are they all young adults, or some of them are older adults?
Congressman, I'm not a lawyer.
Okay. Are they all in Gaza? Are all combatants Hamas?
No.
Are they only individuals that wear black hoods and green headbands?
Hamas, just like any terrorist organization,
Not
certainly
just Hamas.
other organizations like Palestinian Islamic Jihad also, I'm sure, don't only parade in the streets in identifiable uniforms.
That's right. And it's not just Hamas, like you just mentioned. Now, when I brought this up, which I think is very important to bring up, to identify who's innocent and not innocent, of which I absolutely acknowledge there are innocent people there, even though, again, that has been stripped from me from comments from my colleagues. When I brought that up, my colleague up here, who's missing now, probably conveniently, asked me if I was a member of the KKK. And one of my colleagues over here also tried to censure me for distinguishing between innocent and non-civilian and trying to actually look at who is and who isn't. And this is the big problem about that lie. That lie is actually worse than the Al-Ali hospital bombing lie that was told by Rashida Tlaib in the New York Times and the Associated Press, because that is a much more persistent lie that Hamas is begging, Palestinians are begging members of Congress to make. They're counting on the fact that people here won't try to distinguish that it's not just Hamas terrorists. It's also Palestinians, it's also women, it's also under 18, it's also older people. And when they do that, they get that circle of lies where they think everybody thinks over there they're a victim, and then they get the anti-Semitic riots and terrorism, and then they get the people calling for ceasefires and for making them a second state. And that's why that lie, and these people unwilling to question that and yelling at me for questioning that, are creating a much more persistent problem than even what Rashida Tlaib put out there. And I yield back.
Gentlemen.